Good afternoon. Well, in fact, in your case, it's good morning. My name is Courtney Zietzk. I am a teacher from the Oregon coast, place called Reedsport, right on the beautiful Pacific coast here. I was originally from Seattle, Washington, and I spent 11 and a half years on Saipan Island, which is in the central western Pacific, not far from China. I spent over 11 years out there teaching social studies. I am AP and IB certified. I'm also a master's degree holder in education. I am been around for a while. I love what I do as a teacher. I'm licensed in 5 U.S. states plus a U.S. trust territory of Saipan, Northern Mariana Islands. So I kind of have some pretty good experience here. I've traveled all over the world. I've traveled in 56 countries on 6 continents. So I am well versed in international studies, geography, and of course, AP, IB, US, and world history. It seems to be my specialty. I really like what I do. I've been asked to do a series of webinars, a total of 10 of them, relating to US history in the end of World War I and the World War II era. So we're going to be hitting these over the next 10 lessons. I think you will find them to be extremely important, and I think you'll really like it. So let's begin here in just a minute. And let's see, Annie has already probably introduced the course. So let's just get right on into this thing. I've got a bunch of really neat stuff planned for this class. I think you will really enjoy it. So we're going to start off first tonight with one of the most important things about World War II, and that was really actually World War I. Because when World War II started, big part of why World War II started was because of World War I. Just as a little brief refresher, those of you who have not taken this before, or those of you who need some little refreshing on this, World War I ended quite badly. It ended badly for Germany, especially because the enemies of Germany in World War I, which were the Allied powers, they wanted to punish Germany severely for what their role in World War I was all about. But one only has to go through the documents, mainly that of the Treaty of Versailles, which conclusively can pretty much document that Germany did not start World War I. Alliances were being formed prior to World War I, and as a result of that, World War I came about because of the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria by Serbian nationals, what they now know is called the Black Hand. Germany was simply brought into this war as a participant like everybody else was. But at the end of the war, we had this thing called the Treaty of Versailles, which was terribly unfair to Germany. They were completely overwhelmed with clauses and blame, and they were made to pay for everything. And that was a big part of why a certain gentleman, a corporal in the German army, would eventually rise and become the leader of Germany, fascist party, which is Adolf Hitler. He used the example of the Treaty of Versailles and its harsh treatment of Germany as an excuse to do what he did, which is extreme nationalism with regard to Germany, the blue-eyed Aryan master race and all that stuff. But it was a rise of power, to be for sure, which will be discussed in detail on this webinar. So that's just a kind of a refresher, kind of an introduction of what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about the rise and the fall of the German Reich. Obviously, World War II, when Germany attacked Poland in September of 1939, will be discussed in its entirety. And we'll also be talking, obviously, about the downfall of the German nation and, of course, Adolf Hitler with it. And, of course, one of the most troubling things within this era that we're going to be discussing is what we call the Jewish Holocaust, which was the systematic extermination of over 6 million Jewish people, quite horribly, I might add. So we were going to be definitely be looking at a lot of different things. This will definitely help a lot of people realize what exactly the extent of this was all about, but also it gives you a perspective about what happened because of this. And this is a big part of the AP curriculum, is what happened in Europe and the world because of the Holocaust. So we're going to be certainly taking a look at that. The United States and world competing powers after World War II would be getting into this thing we call the Cold War. So anyway, let's begin our web discussion today. I'm going to share the screen with everybody here, and we are going to be taking a look at, okay, let's take a look here. Okay, Hitler's rise to power. I think that's the first one we're going to do. Yes, it is. Okay. Okay, so we're looking at, I hope everybody can see that, Hitler's rise to power, an overview of the causes of Hitler's rise to power in Germany. I'm also going to be doing tonight, providing we have enough time, which we will, I'm going to be getting a little into World War I. In fact, because I want to go a little bit into Hitler first to kind of give you a flavor of what he did and why he did it and where he did it. But then I'm going to come back a little bit and I want to discuss a little bit about the end of World War I, which I think is very important. And it kind of puts it all together. When I do it this way, I've had some very, very good comments about the presentation of the material, because we all want to learn this stuff and we all want to know what happened, where happened, and why did it happen? And most importantly, what did it lead to? Let's take a look at this. Okay, what we already know. Okay, the Nazi Party was formed in 1919. Hitler joined the party shortly after its inception. Germany was in a state of disarray after the First World War, and there were many extremist groups in Germany at the time, e.g. communists, that were trying to take over Germany. What's very important to understand about this German rise to power of Adolf Hitler was the fact is that the Treaty of Versailles itself. Now remember, after World War I, President Wilson went over to Europe with his proposals about the League of Nations, and we were looking at Wilson's 14 points, and then we were obviously looking at the Treaty of Versailles, which was negotiated at the Palace of Versailles during Wilson's visit. Consequently, because of that, Wilson became very ill at this meeting of what they call the Big Four in the Palace of Versailles from the Spanish flu, kind of something we're doing now on almost like a global pandemic basis, but became very sick. In fact, a lot of people died of this pandemic. In fact, more people died of the Spanish flu than actually World War I itself. But what we already know about World War I, that it was a terrible war, and it was a war that nobody could actually win until the United States was forced to come in because of the sinking of the vessel, the MV Lusitania, as well as the Zimmermann telegraph note. That's what brought the United States formally into this war, and I think everybody knows about that, but we will review that just a little bit tonight, and that's why I do this. So Hitler would come to power, and why he would come to power was because of the Treaty of Versailles itself. Hitler was punished, or I'm sorry, Germany was punished for everything it did. They were not allowed to have an army. Their territory was being taken away from them or annexed away from them. We had all kinds of problems with financial problems. They were made to pay for everything. And the treaty itself of Versailles contained 444 different clauses within this agreement, which Germany, by the way, was not even allowed to be there at its initial signing and presentation. That's how bad this was. But 414 of the 444 clauses of this Treaty of Versailles were dedicated explicitly for punishing Germany for what they had done during the war. They were blamed for everything. So this is why Hitler would come to power. He would preach nationalism, that Germany is a great country, it's got fantastic history, and that appoint me as your Führer or your father or your leader, as it were, and I will do a lot of good things for Germany. Now, keep in mind, when Germany was going through all of this stuff after World War I, it was in disarray. It was almost apocalyptic in nature. Nobody had jobs. The economy was terrible. And everybody was trying to figure out, what are we going to do? Heilants, or what they called, were saviors all over Germany, preaching to the people about how they were going to fix Germany and they were going to do all these things, but none of them really made any sense. What's important to understand is that in German, there is no plural word for Heilants or savior or leader. There can be only one. And that's very important we understand that, because the people always ask me, how come there wasn't any more Adolf Hitlers or more leaders that were vying for this? Because there could be only one. 1919 to 1923. Many Germans were disillusioned after the defeat of the First World War. Ex-soldiers felt that they had been stabbed in the back and felt that they had not been defeated on the battlefield. Many of them joined right-wing groups such as what they call the Freikorps or the Nazi Party. A Spartacus raising led to many people fearing a communist revolution in Germany. People looked to the right-wing groups to act against this, the Freikorps or the Nazi Party in particular. Economic hardship was coupled with the humiliation of the result of the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, which we've discussed. Right-wing groups gained popularity by saying that they would destroy what they call the TOV. Okay, so we had some major problems. Okay, how did Nazi Party gain support in this period? Now, this is a very good question. And so this is very important. Many military uniforms demonstrated strength at the time when the government was weak. It gave people a needed structure that they desperately wanted, because these people were starting to go hungry. They were starving to death, and they had no money. They had no hope. Well, this unification of this Nazi Party with the uniforms, the structure, and the promise of a better tomorrow was very attractive for younger people who were disillusioned with the fact that, what are we going to do? So anyway, populist policies and rhetoric were employed to discredit opponents and win support. Anybody ever heard of what they call propaganda? This is where propaganda would make a very serious impression on a lot of people in Germany. And Hitler was an absolute master at propaganda and the Nazi Party. References traditional values and reminders of what was to blame for the economic crisis to build support. Hitler, and believe it or not, rightly so, he blamed the Treaty of Versailles, which was, in fact, extremely unfair to Germany. So this was a big part of why he became very popular. Okay, so 1923 is what they call a Munich push violent uprising. In fact, it was actually in a beer cellar in Munich. By 1923, the Nazi Party had gained much support in Bavaria. Now firmly under the control of Adolf Hitler, the group attempts to seize government control through the use of force. Despite having many sympathizers, the push fails and Hitler is imprisoned. He actually started to incite a national revolution in Germany from a beer cellar. 16 of his followers were executed by the police, and Hitler was able to get away, but he did go to jail for what he did. But that's what made a lot of people sympathize about what he was trying to do. Hey, I'm going to jail and I'm trying to do something good for you and this country. So it didn't obviously it wasn't very popular with a lot of people in Germany. The failure at the beer hall demonstrates the power can only be achieved through legal means, i.e. through elections. Not quite how Hitler would come to power. So we were going to be certainly taking a look at that. Okay, the regroup. Now here's what Hitler did. While in prison, Hitler analyzes the party strategy. Political strategies are developed and refined. There's a shift to winning electoral support. He has to have the power of the people. Now remember, keep something in mind. As all this was going on, Germany was sinking further and further into despair. And the reason being is that, well, we're going to go do that pretty quick, but it would be pretty obvious that Germany would feel much worse in a very short period of time. Hitler was now developing and fine-tuning his propaganda machine. He was a master at this, like I told you. He was able to win support on a whole different level and through multiple fronts in Germany. And he attempts to win support of big business, which he actually did. One of the most important things about this would be called the German miracle. And the German miracle was more of a financial miracle. He actually put people, massive employment, people back to work in Germany when he would become fully in power. And in fact, it was so impressive that the United States' Time magazine would actually label him Time Magazine Man of the Year. In fact, such an important thing because when he would come to power, within a couple of years, like 3 years after he would come to power, Berlin would actually put on the 1936 Olympic Games in Berlin. People were amazed about how modern and how fantastic Berlin had been rebuilt and was doing. It was quite extraordinary. But prior to that, though, there was something else going on. Okay, let's get into this. 1924 through 1929, 5 years. Now, during this period of time, Hitler would write his famous book called Mein Kampf, which is called My Struggle. He would detail about how Germany got ripped off, how he was trying to do a better job with everything, and it had a very, very racist tone against it with Jews and people that were, quote, non-Aryan, okay? And we're certainly going to get into a little bit of that. But a tradition of traditional values, or its focus on traditional values, extremely important when it comes to winning the hearts and minds of the German people. Okay, building up fear of left-wing groups, continued use of military imagery, but there was a lack of electoral support due to the relative prosperity in Germany at the time. Now, this isn't very important, but I want everybody to understand. This is very important about how Hitler would come to power even faster. And that is in 1929. I'm going to ponder this for just a second and ask people out there, how many of you remember what happened in 1929? Because this is very important, and this would facilitate Hitler's rise to power. So think about that for just a second. What happened in 1929 that would facilitate anything like this? Most history students would immediately understand that in October of 1929, the world would go through what is known as the Great Depression. And it started in New York. It started with a stock market crash, and then a couple of months later, we would have a systematic cascading bank failure throughout the entire United States. So obviously, when this was going on, it was a ripple effect through the entire economy of the world. Because Germany was doing terrible before that time, they got hit especially hard with the Great Depression. Things didn't go very well at all. This is what would facilitate Hitler's rise to power, was the fact that now Germany is even worse off in the general sector. But the Nazi Party and what Hitler was doing with the rise of the Nazi armies and all of the stuff that he was working on, things were actually going better because people had a sense of unity, camaraderie, and a general purpose. People were wandering around Germany trying to figure out, what are we going to do? We're starving to death. So obviously, this was a needed structural support of the German people, even though it was based on anger, and eventually it would be known as being total hatred of a lot of different people. It was giving the core of Germany, its, quote, Aryan master race, needed structural support. So now what happens? 1929 to 1932, a change in fortunes. Here we go. Wall Street crashes, like I just told you about, leads to the end of effective financial assistance from the United States of America. Okay, we were actually trying to help these people, but now we couldn't because the United States was in big, big trouble financially. Unemployment rises, hyperinflation occurs or reoccurs, and the fears return to 1923. Threat of communism increases. Coalition government fails to address problems successfully. Hitler would actually run for office. He would be defeated as he ran for office, but a political bargain was made. And in 1933, incidentally, the same year that Franklin Delano Roosevelt of the United States would be sworn in as president of the United States, Adolf Hitler would become Chancellor of Germany. Interestingly enough, only after 52 days after he would become Chancellor, Hitler would successfully consolidate power and basically rise to the level of dictator. Okay. So let's continue with this. And this is all very, very important when you realize about what Germany did and why they did it. Okay, so into government. Electoral support rises by 1932. The Nazis become the single largest party in the Reichstag, and continuing economic crisis leads to a breakdown of coalitions. Aging and ineffective President Hindenburg becomes increasingly reliant on Article 48, and Germany in desperate need of a strong leader. Hitler with a big question mark. What kind of a leader would he be? What is he promising the German people? And most importantly, how is he going to make it happen? Pretty good questions. Okay, now in power. In 1933, Hitler is invited to become chancellor by politicians who believe that Hitler can be manipulated. Not a very smart idea, because Hitler was not going to be manipulated. He was a unifying force within Germany, but absolutely positively, he was not going to be manipulated or controlled. President Hindenburg's death in 1934 allows Hitler to assume all presidential powers, and he becomes the Führer, or the father of Germany. The Nazi Party rise to power is complete, and from all intents and purposes, Hitler is the most powerful man by far in Germany. Now, rise to power in an overview. What he was doing was simply he had strong leadership. He was determined. He was a popular rhetoric and Hitler's capabilities as a public speaker. Weakness of the coalition government to stop him. Wall Street crash and consequent economic collapse of the rest of the world would propel him, because he was telling people, I'm going to make your life better. And he did. Support for significant business people, disruption of extremist opponents, and the fear of communism. This is what all led to Hitler becoming a leader of Germany. Now, here's what he did when he became Chancellor and leader of Germany, or the Führer. First thing he did was, and he realized this, is if he's going to maintain and consolidate power through all of Germany, he had to make absolutely sure that people, the Aryan German race, would be and could have employment. The number, and he understood this very clearly. Hitler was a very smart guy when it came to getting people to do what he wanted them to do. Hitler realized that if he's going to be a strong leader, he has to put the people to work. They have to benefit from his policies. And they did. He put literally millions of people to work. They built the Autobahn. They did all kinds of infrastructure projects. And by the way, does anybody know what the Autobahn actually is? It's one of the major freeway highway systems in Germany. In fact, the highway system in Germany at the time that connected from point A to point B all over Germany. Today, we recognize it as the Autobahn, as a road that has literally no speed limit. But he built this thing, and it was a fantastic achievement in a very bad economy. But he actually put people to work rebuilding Germany. And what the common desire was, is that we are going to rebuild Germany while rebuilding its people. And that's exactly what he did. In fact, if you want to talk about economics, it was what they call the German miracle of the early 1930s. He took a country that was beaten, bankrupt, humiliated in World War I, or because of World War I, and he rebuilt it to the most powerful country in Europe, if not one of the most powerful countries in the world. And he would do that, and basically he would do it within 6 years. Amazing. Okay, so this is what the overview of what Hitler's rise to power was. Now I'm going to go through a little bit at the end of World War I to give you kind of a backup information about how Germany was as a country before Hitler would actually take it over. What was happening in Europe at the conclusion of World War I, because this was critical. Because what Hitler would do because of World War I, he would re-strategize and kind of rethink everything about Germany to literally prepare it for World War II. So in order to understand about World War II, we first must go back and take a look at World War I. Let's take a look at this. I think you will find it very, very enjoyable. So I hope I don't screw this up. Okay, I think we're in good shape now. So let's take a look. Okay. Now let's take a look at this thing. And we'll get into World War I PowerPoint. And we are going to look at, the end of World War I, which will be, okay, let's take a look at this one right here. Okay, winning the peace. Remember, as World War I concluded, the United States didn't want any part of this war, okay? We were trying to be neutral. The United States, with President Wilson, was saying, hey, look, man, this is not our war. We don't want to be a part of it. But because of the sinking of the motor vessel Versailles, or I'm sorry, excuse me, the Lusitania, excuse me, I kind of got ahead of myself there. The Lusitania was sunk, and it was sunk by a German U-boat. And because of this sinking, America started to rethink this a little bit. Now remember, France and Great Britain were allies of the United States. And you can go all the way back to the Revolutionary War period to fully understand what the United States was actually all about. The United States, 13 colonies at that point, relied on France's help for the War of Independence between the 13 colonies and Great Britain, England. So France helped us out. But on the other hand, though, when we received our independence from England, it was England that helped us out, the United States at that point, with the purchase of the Louisiana Territory. England financed it. France gave us the Statue of Liberty. And we've been in business with England and France for a very long period of time. So we were friends, we were allies. So the United States was pretty much drawn to that relationship between these two countries, and these countries needed help. So when war broke out, the United States wanted to remain neutral. President Wilson was a college graduate, had his PhD, and was the president of Princeton University. He was essentially a pacifist. He didn't want the war. However, there was increasing pressure put on the administration and the United States to at least get involved because this was a terrible war and nobody was winning the war. I think a lot of you know about World War I. It was supposed to only be about maybe 3 or 4 months. It turned out it was like 4 years, and it was terrible. It was trench warfare. It was miserable. Nobody was winning. But it was the first time in history that we had now had modern weapons, and the catastrophic death toll was huge. We had machine guns, we had barbed wire, we had tanks, chemical weapons, we had everything that was to kill people a lot, but updated battlefield tactics. So the loss of life was catastrophic. The United States didn't want any part of this, and Europe was shell-shocked to the fact that they thought it was only going to last 4 months. It did not. It was supposed to be the war to end all wars. Guess what? It was not. So at the conclusion of World War I, we got into it because of the sinking of the Lusitania and then the Zimmerman telegraph note, which was urging Mexico to attack the United States along its southern borders from Germany. That was pretty much the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back. When we went into this war, the General John Pershing was given explicit orders by the president to have a separate standing army, that they were part of the United States and not part of any coalition. We were simply a self-sustaining army that Wilson was in control of, with the express objective would be simply to end this war and to win it quickly, which we did. The United States was overwhelming, superior force. We would win this war with really, in about a year and a half, we would end it very quickly. And then we have this thing called the Treaty of Versailles Peace Conference. It was actually anything but peace. Now, it's important to understand that the Big Four, Woodrow Wilson of the United States, David Lloyd George of Great Britain, Georges A. Clemenceau of France, and Orlando Vittorio of Italy, they were what is known as the Big Four. Now, Russia was excluded from this because, as you know, during World War I, Russia pulled out of World War I because of the Bolshevik Revolution and the overthrow of Tsar Nicholas II and his subsequent execution. Him and his family were executed by the Bolsheviks, and they would usher in a brand new period in Russia, which would end not so good for a lot of Russian people. And I'm not going to get too much into this right now, but Tsar Nicholas II of Russia was executed. Now, here's where it gets a little bit dicey. The defeated powers were humiliated because of this treaty, mainly that of Germany. They lost power, they lost prestige in the world, and most importantly, they lost a lot of money. So Wilson's 14-point was his major proposal. Let's get into this a little bit, because this would definitely, well, it would definitely influence things to come. Okay, Wilson's 14 points. To make the world safe for democracy, international law, recommendations of European boundary restructure. Now we're starting to get into some real meat of this thing. And of course, the League of Nations, which was essentially not a good thing that the United States really liked. The United States Congress would strike this down. And many people believe, because of the Spanish flu pandemic, that Wilson's physical health began to deteriorate in Europe. In fact, he began to deteriorate beyond what most people would think would be that he would need some help physically on this. He became weakened, and his positions became weakened. And as a result of the Treaty of Versailles, Wilson was not arguing successfully enough that this was not a very fair deal with Germany is concerned. In fact, that's not what he originally wanted to do. He wanted a world safe for democracy where everybody would be treated basically equal. That's not what Europe wanted, okay? Clemenceau, especially Clemenceau, wanted Germany to pay for the problem. Okay, so let's get into this a little bit, because you can see very clearly from a map standpoint, Europe at war in 1914, you could see the boundaries of Germany via Austria-Hungary. Those were the central powers of Europe. And take a look at what happened after. Germany was cut up. Austria was shrunk. Czechoslovakia would be formed. Parts of Hungary, parts of Poland. They were cutting up. Germany lost probably close to half of its original territory. They were not allowed to have a navy. They were not allowed to have a big enough standing army. They were to leave. All of their overseas possessions would be lost. Well, this was obviously a pretty bad deal for Germany. Nobody else had to give up territory. Nobody else had to pay for everything, but Germany was to accept full responsibility of the war. And this is what made Hitler and the German people very, very angry. Okay, so here's the United States during this period of time. And let's take a look at this, because this would be a big, big factor in this. Okay. A question I'm always asked is, how come the Americans were able to win this war so quickly? And simply because the United States had the firepower, it had the money, and it had the wherewithal to get this thing done. Europe had pretty much wiped itself out because of this war. Year after year, millions of people died during this war. They were weary of the war. The United States came in with a fresh fighting force, and they pretty much cleaned this up. Other factors after the United States entry, again, Russian Revolution and withdrawal. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk allowed Germany to focus on the Western Front, and naval shipping losses were huge, led to the convoy system and record ship construction. Okay. Pershing's Crusaders, the Doughboys, American Expeditionary Force, General John Pershing, first major in action in 1918. Okay. I think we're probably in pretty good shape here. Now let's take a look at a couple more things I want to go over with you that I think will kind of make a big, let's see here. I want to make sure that you guys understand completely what World War I was all about, so we can get into this. Okay, let me see if I can switch this a little bit here. Okay, hopefully everybody's still with me today. Okay, let's take a look. Okay. Let's take a look. Okay, is everybody still with me? Uh-oh. Is everybody still there? I hope I didn't lose anybody. Okay, good. Okay, I just got a message that we're still there. Okay, good. Okay. I'm trying to find my other PowerPoint here because it was a very, very good one. Just a second, okay? I'm going to open the floor for just some questions in just a few minutes. In fact, you know what? I'm already done with the PowerPoints tonight. Let's go ahead and I'm going to discuss a few things with regards to this, this information. Now, I'm going to open up the floor for discussion in about 10 minutes because I was told to do that. But also, I want you guys to clearly understand what the United States' role in World War I was actually all about. When we began World War I, this was supposed to be the war to end all wars. And unfortunately, because of circumstances beyond really anybody's control, it was really a tragedy because this was supposed to be the new century of hope. And unfortunately, it was simply not the case. You know, we're only talking 14 years into the 20th century. It was supposed to be through hope. And in fact, it was not. It was tragedy. The loss of life in World War I would be into the millions. In fact, the official death toll of World War I would be somewhere around 11 to 12 million people would die. That's just casualties, but there was actually more than that because of what happened of exposure and what happened in the aftermath of World War I. It was terrible. And it would cost the United States of America, it would cost us well over $15 billion. Now, when we talk about World War I, we think about, well, okay, how did it get so bad? And why did we have the Great Depression? Because this was a key why Adolf Hitler would accelerate his chancellorship and to his rise to power in Germany. Let's talk about that for just a second, because this would prove to the world that what happens in one place could obviously affect what could happen in someplace else. At the conclusion of World War I, it was realized that the United States of America sold over $11 billion worth of victory bonds or war bonds. And because of that, I'm sure many of you know what a bond is, but a bond is simply this. You walk into a bank or a government agency and you say, hi, I would like to buy a bond. And they say, okay, so you give them, let's say $10 or $9 American, and they give you a certificate or a little bond that says it's worth $10, but it's worth $10 in 10 years. These were 10-year bonds. Some of them were 5, some of them were 8, but many of them were 10 years. Well, they sold $11 billion worth of them. Now, remember, I'm going to ask you, is $11 billion a lot of money today? It's a tremendous amount of money. Now, just think back 106 years ago. Bonds of $11 billion were a tremendous amount of money. So this is obviously, this money had to be paid back, and it was. As a result of the money being paid back, the United States Treasury, along with the area federal banks, were short on money. Now, banks need money to operate. Businesses need money to operate. And when the federal government has had to pay $11 billion back, it's going to create a shortfall of currency as well as credit. But people were living way beyond their means in the roaring 20s, just the period just before the Great Depression. As a result of that, the stock market began to see what was happening. People were doing multiple, companies were trading many, many more times of what they were worth. And all of a sudden, the cascading failure, the dominoes, the quote, house of mirrors began to shatter. And a few months later, obviously the stock market crashed. And then a couple of months later, we had a cascading bank failure because of the Federal Reserve System was on the verge of collapse because of the war bonds, and people were living way beyond their means. There was no governmental safety controls that they have today. As a result, this cascading failure of the American financial system rippled throughout the world economy. Because when the United States had a problem, Europe had a problem, and that accelerated obviously in Europe, and Germany was at the forefront of that. Now remember, Germany was made to pay for everything because of World War I. Well, they couldn't afford to pay for it, and they certainly didn't have any money, and people were in disarray. Now you've got a financial crisis on top of that, and now you've got a real problem. So Hitler was pretty much the right guy at the right time with the right message that resonated with the people of Germany, that elect me, appoint me chancellor, I will be your leader, I will do all kinds of good things for you, and I will make your life better. He had a very, very high degree of professionalism in his speaking. He was very forceful. He was extreme nationalist, and people started to realize this is kind of what we really need. We need somebody who's powerful, who can lift Germany up. So that's why Hitler would become the Führer in Germany, and he would become a very, very powerful guy. That's what would lead him to be a powerful guy, was because of the circumstances because of the Great Depression and because of World War I. Now, it's interestingly enough, when we get into World War II, we're going to realize about the rise of the Third Reich, about how he consolidated power, and most importantly, how did people in Germany allow him, or why did they allow him to do this? And it became obvious to some people that were in the know about this, is that what about Jews, the Jewish people? Because the Jewish people were obviously not welcome at any of his rallies, but systematically over a period of time, he began to persecute the Jews, to separate the Jews, and then put the Jewish people in prison, and then he would execute, or the Holocaust, over 6 million of them. But it wasn't just the Jewish people. He would be having all kinds of issues with people that were not, quote, the blue-eyed master Aryan race. And this was particularly trouble with a lot of people. He would also have problems with gypsies and people that he felt were inferior. I'm going to recommend a movie to the class here. And if you ever want to see something really good, it's called The Rise and the Fall of the Third Reich. It is absolutely a fantastic video about Hitler's rise to power, war, and then the declination of Hitler and Germany in World War II. And it was a fascinating look about how people would react. It's amazing. Okay. So, does anybody have any questions? I've been told to open it up about now. We've got about 10, 15 more minutes left. Let's talk about this. Does anybody have any questions? because we're going to be looking at World War II very extensively in the next, next 9 lessons. So feel free to ask questions. We're just on the verge of this, so I am here waiting for your questions. So anyway, good discussion tonight, by the way. I wanted to kind of structure it like this because I think it would be a very good place to start about why did people do what they did and why did Hitler do what he did. So what do you think about the role about Australia and New Zealand in World War I? Well, their role was very limited because of the geography between New Zealand and Australia and Germany in Europe. Obviously, they were British protectorates. They were part of what would eventually be the British Commonwealth, but those were British colonies, which would later become part of the British Commonwealth. But because of the distance involved, their role was actually quite limited, but that would change in World War II. Does anybody have any questions? What is the name of the movie again? The movie again is called The Rise and the Fall of the Third Reich. It's put out by the History Channel in the United States, and I think you probably could find it on YouTube. If any of you can get YouTube, just type in Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, R-E-I-C-H, and it is a fascinating look at Germany, World War I, the end of it, the rise, the plateau of Hitler, and it's really, really good. The rise and fall of the the Third Reich, that's correct. Okay, and it's a fascinating look, and it's fantastic because the question that people ask is, how did Hitler take control of Germany? And it wasn't the fact that he took control, the people of Germany gave it to him. And that is very interesting. And the question is answered is, why did they give it to him? So it's on YouTube. Okay, do you think what Hitler did is not smart by starting another war? It was terrible. It was a terrible thing to do because one, war in any shape, way, or form is terrible because you're killing people. But not only that, though, but Hitler was almost suicidal when he began to when he began to this war. He was getting a little crazy, I think, because to attack Russia was terrible. But was even worse is that when he declared war on the United States, and we're going to get into that. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves because the Japanese would play a key role in bringing the United States in, obviously, as you know, what they call the bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. Why did Hitler think like that? Because he had a God complex. Hitler thought that he could do anything. Now remember, when we would begin World War II, which we're going to actually get into next class period, Hitler couldn't be stopped. His blitzkrieg and the Luftwaffe, the Air Force, was absolutely unstoppable. Remember, when Hitler got into power, his first absolute role was to, one, rebuild Germany, to create employment, infrastructure, but also to rebuild their military as fast as he possibly could, which is what he did. And the reason he did it was, one, to make Germany strong again militarily, but he also did it because he realized that it would create millions of jobs, which would create money, which people then would begin to support him more. And this is what's important about that. Okay, that's a very good question from Grace. Very, very good question about that. Could the people take the power away from him? This is what Hitler was doing very, very effectively through the use of propaganda and the fact that he had now the Nazis, the Nazi German Fascist Party, the army, military, they wouldn't dare go against Hitler because it was very clear. If you are against Hitler, that means you're against Germany. And if you're against Hitler or Germany, you're against all of us, which means that you either join us or else. And the Nazi Party became very, very powerful. In fact, they were even indoctrinating children to be Hitler's, quote, people. In fact, young women of Germany in that area, in that time frame, that were not married were known as Hitler's brides. When you see the movie, if you're able to see it, you'll see very clearly what was going on here. But you're either with Germany or you're against it. And if you're against it, we will definitely not be in very good shape, okay? Okay. I hope that answers your question. Any other questions?
Hi, Courtney.
Hi there.
Can I turn their microphone? Then I
I'm
can
sorry?
talk. Can I turn their microphone? Then can talk to you.
Sure.
Thanks.
Do you want me to turn off my microphone?
Answer Ray.
Yes, is Hitler proud as he had a lot of power, just as proud to start a war as you say.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah. I didn't understand. Was I being asked a question?
Yes, because I don't think that Hitler is too proud to start a war. So what made him start a war?
Oh no, he was definitely proud to start a war. The reason that he started a war was because he waltzed into Austria unopposed. Then they gave him Czechoslovakia. He was already starting to go to war, but he wanted also Poland, and Poland was basically the line in the sand. England and France told him that if you get Poland, it will be World War II. But Hitler didn't think anybody could stop him. He had the strongest army in Europe by far, and he had certainly the most organization, and he had rebuilt the country to the point where they literally could not be stopped. And Hitler knew that. He knew the fact that he would win pretty much everything. And he had at that time, he had an agreement with Russia that they would not interfere. Russia was already involved in their Bolshevik stuff. But also, and this would come down, in 1940, is that he would have the Axis agreement that would bring Japan into what they call the Axis power fold. So he didn't think he could get stopped. And he wanted the territory, and he wanted the power and the control of Europe. And for the most part, he did just that from 1939 up until 1941, there was nothing that anybody could do to stop him.
Okay, thanks.
You bet.
Next question, Annie.
Okay, when did the final solution actually start? Okay, good question. Okay, in 1938, they had this thing called the Kristallnacht. And Kristallnacht in German means night of broken glass. Shortly before that, Hitler's final solution of the German people, or with regards to the Jewish people, were given to the Germans. What do we do with the Jewish people? They had propaganda all over Germany that they were rotten people, that they couldn't be trusted, that they were terrible, and as a result of that, Kristallnacht was the beginning of the final solution. Would be that they would eventually round these people up, put them in concentration camps, and destroy them. 6 million Jewish people. Tragic, by the way. Probably one of the lowest, terriblest things with regards to anything in human history. Okay. Was Hitler good at drawing? Very good question. As a matter of fact, he was. Hitler was going to be an artist. but his work was rejected in Vienna because it wasn't, I think what they said, it wasn't festive enough. But if you look at some of his drawings, he was quite good. In fact, this is very important, class. I want you guys to understand this. Hitler's most cherished goal as a child, his main goal in life was to become a priest, a Catholic priest. Well, actually, I'm sorry, no, not a Catholic priest, a Reformed priest, because he did not like some of the way the Catholics were doing it. In fact, he was a great admirer of the great Martin Luther, who reformed the Catholic Church. But Hitler didn't like the Jewish people because of something that they did, according to the Bible, approximately 2,000 years ago. And they persecuted and crucified Jesus Christ. In fact, many of Hitler's writings in his diary chronicle his hatred of the Jewish people because of what they had done. Very interesting.
Courtney, Annie has a question.
Certainly.
Oh, hi. Thank you thank you for your introduction.
Mhm.
Hi. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, I think someone concluded Napoleon and Hitler made the same mistake by fighting on two sides. Yes, but how much do you agree or not agree? So what if do you, what is your perspective?
Yeah. Okay.
What if Hitler hadn't fought on two sides?
Okay. Here's where this is where it gets very interesting. Hitler's biggest mistake in World War II is that he attacked Russia. Okay, Russia was a huge country that was not powerful at that point, but had so much real estate between cities that Hitler could not sufficiently man his people and protect his people at time of war. As a matter of fact, Hitler's greatest mistake, besides declaring war on the United States, was attacking Russia. They were winning, but then Russia regrouped, and then the winter of 1942 and 41 were absolutely decimated the German army, simply because they froze to death in Russia. So he was unprepared for that type of an attack, and Russia would come back strong. The second thing that he did, and was very important, probably the most important thing, was that he declared war after the United States declared war on Japan as a response to the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Remember, there, the Treaty of Versailles, excuse me, not the Treaty of Versailles, the Axis power agreement specifically said that if one of us is attacked, we will protect the other one. Well, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor in 1941, December 7th. The United States, in response to that, declared war on Japan. The very next day, because of the agreement of the Axis power, Germany would declare war on the United States. That was about the most, to put it bluntly, it was plain stupid. Because the United States, if you take a look at the geography between the United States and Japan and Russia, Japan and Germany, excuse me, the United States is many, many times bigger. The United States was a well-educated population with almost unlimited natural resources. And we were starting to try to come out of a Great Depression. This was the worst thing in the world that Hitler could have done, was to declare war on the United States. And the Japanese admiral that attacked Pearl Harbor, Yamamoto, was very clear. We had awoken a sleeping giant in the United States. When we got involved in this thing, we would produce weapons and aircraft and ships beyond comprehension. The United States' industrial military complex was absolutely born, and we were absolutely, you guys attacked us at Pearl Harbor. Now Hitler's going to declare war on us. Not a good move. And Hitler was absolutely infuriated at the Japanese for doing that because he wasn't ready to get the United States into war. He still had a problem with Russia, and he couldn't get England because they couldn't get England. They couldn't get England to surrender. So we're going to get into World War II very, very extensively, you guys. It's very important that we not go too far ahead right now. But when we get back into the World War, into World War II next time, I think you'll find it very, very interesting on how we get this thing started in World War II. But I wanted to give you today just a really nice kind of little warm up about World War I, about what happened in World War I, a little bit about the rise of Hitler and how he was able to get control of Germany. And it's not really how he did it, but it's why the people of Germany gave it to him. And we get onto all these things about German nationalism and all these wonderful things that he's going to do. And he did. Hitler was good for Germany for about 5 years. But then things started to get crazy and not so smart and not so good. And many people believe that he committed suicide in 1945, but there's a lot of people that are now starting to realize that maybe he didn't commit suicide. So we'll get into that. Okay, so yeah, Hitler was not a nice guy, okay? He was responsible for killing pretty close to about 20 million people. Actually more than that. He started World War II. The Japanese killed a lot of people. Overall, there was over 100 million people that would die as a result of World War II. And unfortunately, Hitler and Germany was a big part of that. And what would happen to Germany in World War II was tragic. Remember, not everybody in Germany wanted or supported Hitler, but they had no choice. If you said anything against him, you were probably jailed and killed. So we're going to get into that. We're also going to get into a little bit of comparison and comparative analysis of the Japanese and the Germans about what they did and why they did it, and a little bit of compare and contrast between the two countries, because they were part of the Axis power agreement. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I have got to go. I've got another class that I got to go into in about 5 minutes. So I appreciate everybody being here, and I certainly look forward to everybody next week and the second webinar. I think you will really enjoy this. You're going to learn a lot about World War II. So anyway, it has been a pleasure. So Miss Annie, I will see you later. And
Yeah.
thank you very much for having me today. Bye-bye, everybody.